Right now, millions of acres are being burned all over the West. And the government is spending tens of millions of dollars a day of your tax money to fight it. This is nature's clear cut. A lot of people think that we shouldn't clear cut anything because it's not natural. What do you think a 30,000 acre fire does? It clears everything. When it burns now, sometimes it will burn too hot, burn right down to the soil. For years, you've been told that the West managed itself magically. It was perfectly balanced until the European invasion came. This idea that nature can't handle human pressure. Preservation only leads to disasters, more fires, rotten forests. This morning, I'm at 8,000 feet, hiking into a burn scar to see what happens after the fire. Whether fires are a benefit to the climate, the habitat, or you. All right, there's an elk track right here. The snow has just come off of here, even though it's July. As it gets hotter in the summer, this will all be brown. I think this is the trail. I'm not positive. For years, you've been told that the West managed itself magically. That over the eons, it was perfectly balanced until the European invasion came. But that's not the case. There was something managing the forest. And one of the reasons for me going this way is to show you what it is. This is a fire pit. See, it hasn't been used in some years. Preservation is this idea that nature can't handle human pressure, so that any human interaction with nature is bad. And that's why the wolves are going in, that's why the bears are going in. Bring back nature to its pristine self. But what they're talking about is preserving it from humans. You see how this isn't even a perfect ring anymore. Most likely a bear came and flipped a couple of these rocks over looking for bugs and stuff. There's grass, everything growing up through it. Even though there's been people sitting here, you can't even see the impact they have. There's been cattle on this over and over and over again. When you look at nature, it defies what they're actually telling you, that we have to leave it alone from all human pressure. Nature is resilient. It needs disturbance to rejuvenate. Now I've got to find the trail because I have no idea where it actually was. I always carry protection. I just carry a 40 and with solids in it. Hopefully I never have to use it, but it's there if I need it. This is so grown over that I can't even find the trail. Must go right over there. This used to be a road, obviously. It's a 2-track. Well, I see there's kind of a trail around this. So here's an old burn. This one burned quite a while ago because it has trees in it that are quite a bit taller than me. Now this timber, they can't harvest this timber now. It's back in a roadless area anyway, so it's illegal, but this is all just gonna rot and fall over at some point. You see where it's all kind of falling down. Finding some stuff? And that will just rot into the ground. And then this forest right here, these young trees, all these little trees you see, they'll all grow up to become a forest. Now this happened to burn pretty well, apparently, because the trees are pretty well spaced, the new trees. See how the trees are, I mean, they're thick, but they're probably about the same thickness as this old forest that burned. Sometimes when it burns really hot, everything popping at the same time, all the cones, and you'll have super, super thick growth of trees that comes up that you can't even, that wildlife can't even use. They go in it to bed, but it doesn't even allow sunlight or the snow to hit the ground. All these trails always look harmless on a map. I'm just going to take a guess and say this trail isn't used very much. Well, I found the trail. I wasn't actually on it, apparently, because this looks way better. I had marked out a trail on my phone the night before, and that was a different trail. Apparently that's an old road that they don't use anymore. What in the world happened here? So the top of this tree is just laying here. It came from up there. There isn't like a, usually when that happens, there's like a tree that fell over and clipped it, but there's nothing that is new. See, all this stuff, all these trees are gray ends, and that's green still, so that just fell off. That one's bent over too. I guess the only thing that could have happened is the snow got so heavy on it. At some point it like froze on there with ice and stuff and bent it over and broke it off. The only thing I can think. The only thing about being up here on the top here, I'm at about 8,500 feet and there is nothing above me. I am on the top, going along the top of this ridge. So the only thing you don't want up here is a lightning storm. Last year they found a couple guys dead over in Colorado who were really experienced hikers, and they couldn't figure out what happened to them. They were really high, even kind of under a cliff. And then they discovered that they had been hit by lightning. So anytime you have an encounter with a 500 or 600 pound wild animal in the timber, it just does something to you that just heightens your excitement. It's something we've had in our DNA for thousands of years. There's something else that heightens my excitement in the woods, and that's a hot cup of cowboy coffee. Well, I forgot my lighter. I took my lighter out because I was going to wash my pants, so I don't have my lighter. So this sometimes will start. Oh, look at there. What was I worried about? So look around us here. Fire and people managed this forest for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Fire was extremely common in these mountains and all across the West up until about 1920 or 30 when we started suppressing that fire. Also, there was way more people than you think. They estimate the population of Indians to be about 900,000 to 1 million north of Mexico when Lewis and Clark came across. But that's not the whole story, because before Lewis and Clark got here, there was a vast wave of disease that washed across the West. And it's estimated that Indian tribes lost 70 to 90% of their population before Lewis and Clark came. So when the estimates were made, they were looking at Lewis and Clark journals, like what they saw when they came across. They estimated from those numbers. But when you take into consideration that they had lost 70 to 90% of their population before that, you come up with a very different number. Several scholars have actually come up with numbers in the tens of millions north of Mexico, which would have a much greater impact on the West. This wasn't totally empty wilderness. Even at the time of Lewis and Clark, they were running into Indian tribes the entire way. At one point, when they camped in the Mandan village, there was more people in that village than there was in the capital city of this country, in Washington, D.C. There was over 4,500 Indians gathered there in that village for the winter. I'm waiting for my coffee to boil here. Getting close, see there? Another instance of Indians having a massive impact on the environment and habitat is down in the Chaco Canyon, where the Anasazi were living. The Anasazi built these huge cities. Now, these cities were full of massive timbers, huge trees, and they're 50 miles from a forest. So at first people got to thinking that they had hauled all this timber from there, and they're like, why would you build a city out here
in the middle of nothing, in the middle of a desert, and then haul all your timber. I read a book called Collapse.
It's a book by Jared Diamond.
And he brought up an interesting point. When they studied the pack rat middens, so pack rats run around wherever they are and they gather vegetation. They form it into balls in their nest and they pee on it, and it kind of hardens into crystallized little balls. Well, they do this everywhere. And the pack rat middens in the cities of Anasazi people had forest, like pine needles and pine cones, like a forest floor would have. It was most likely that that entire area was actually forest, was a pine and pinyon forest when the Anasazi people established their cities. And so they were able to get their lumber from right there. But after they cleared more and more and more of that, they had to bring it in from like long distances up to 50 miles away once they had cleared all the forest around them. And it's evident that they used a lot of timber because just some of their great houses would take over 200,000 massive trees to build the roofs.
There's nothing like a cup of coffee way out here after you worked hard and sweated up a storm. I know some people may not enjoy coffee for that, but I sure do. So here's the uncomfortable truth about fire. What it does is actually create habitat. It opens up the canopy. It, clears off the trees so the sun can hit the ground. It helps grasses grow. Obviously, creates better habitat because a lot of times the wildlife will prefer the areas that have burned. This grass right here, that's something that wildlife really like to eat. Now this is bear grass, which they don't like to eat. This burned, and it didn't actually benefit the land that much. I believe the Indians burned off the forest often to keep the game in certain areas, to keep feed for the game, and probably lightning strikes just happened, and without fire suppression like we have today, it just burned. Because this makes such great habitat, does that mean we should burn down our forests every year? I've recently heard some high-profile hunters saying that fire is a very good tool for wildlife habitat. Maybe, but it has an enormous cost. We have to choke on smoke all summer long if we have a bunch of forest fires. Sometimes because we have kind of suppressed fire for so long, when it burns now, sometimes it will burn too hot, burn right down to the soil. Instead of creating habitat, it just creates a desolate landscape. Also, if somebody is worried about carbon, a forest fire releases all the stored carbon in a forest in days. Carbon that is stored in its roots for decades. And then there's the cost to you, the taxpayer. We pay hundreds of millions of dollars a year to fight fires. When they say, well, there's a whole bunch of jobs there. Yes, there is a bunch of jobs in fires, but that comes from our taxpayer dollars. Whether it's a private contractor or somebody who works for the Forest Service, when they fight a fire, they're being paid with your tax dollars. So the cost is enormous. Not only that, but when it gets to a town, if it burns up a bunch of houses, a bunch of fences, telephone poles, the cost can add up tremendously. What if I told you that we could do the same thing? We could open the canopy, create the same habitat without all the smoke and choking and burning. We can, by using a chainsaw. It's called logging. Now, a lot of people have misconceptions about logging because of some of the practices they see on private land. So when a logging company owns land, they're managing that land for the most amount of production in timber. What they'll do is they'll harvest all the timber off, and then they will plant back Douglas fir or whatever it is that they want to harvest. And then they'll try to spray out like every other plant so that they grow faster, because there's less competition. That is tree farming. But on public land, logging can be used to create habitat. You can open the forest. You can leave standing timber in certain areas because wildlife love, look at that grass, that's good grass right there. Wildlife love to be able to have feed, so open areas, along with bedding areas, somewhere they can feel comfortable, secure, because they're hidden in a thicker forest. So you need both. You don't want to clear cut everything, but you want to clear cut some of it, because this is nature's clear cut. You know, a lot of people think that we shouldn't clear cut anything because it's not natural. What do you think a 30,000 acre fire does? It clears everything. And instead of that, we need to have plans where we log and create fire buffer zones where we have openings and timber, where we have grass and cover. That is the best thing for the wildlife that we could possibly do, while at the same time creating a way easier place to fight a fire from. So it doesn't cost us near as much to fight. But since we've bought into the preservation mindset, the lie that this land was completely untouched by human hands and that does better without us, that it somehow balanced itself magically without humans up to 200 years ago, is a fantasy. That is something that we have learned from school and Disney, not from reality. When you look at the real numbers, there was people all over here. They were hunting, they were burning, they were building things, they were cutting down whole forests. What this teaches us is that man is needed on the land. He can do really bad things, and yet we can do really good things. You can't go one way to one extreme or the other. You need to use wisdom on top of knowledge and manage what we have for abundance, to create a landscape full of abundance, full of wildlife, full of diversity. That's what we need. We need to remember the difference between conservation for human fulfillment and enjoyment, that we can come out here and connect with nature and experience it and see it, look around us and discover that preservation only leads to disasters, more fires, rotten forests, and the locking out of the human. Elk rub rubbed on this tree. When you look at a huge forest, you know, that's what our screensavers say is the perfect habitat, you know, this old growth forest. But the problem is that is not what produces the food that the elk and deer need. And elk and deer must have food to survive the wintertime. When people say that, oh, well, this is just because of winter kill. Well, why is winter kill happening? Mostly because they don't have enough nutrition to make it through till the spring. So that's why the mule deer population you see on the charts was actually rising greatly during the time period in the 1960s when we were logging the most. That's because we were actually producing, we were clearing off the trees and producing the food that they needed to actually get nutrition and survive a lot longer. Predators play a massive role in the population of things like mule deer, but I think that their population may even be more sensitive to the actual habitat, the amount of feed that they have. If you don't have food, like I haven't seen anything that they would actually eat on either side, even though that's open. None of that is really the right kind of vegetation. See, this stuff just, I don't know why they don't eat it. They just don't eat that. This right here, this flower right here is called lupine, I believe. So they can't eat that because that's poisonous. Beargrass is pretty because it grows this really tall stalk with a really pretty flower on it. But it isn't really palatable for anything. Elk, deer, moose, whatever. None of them eat it. I've got to head. I got to make some tracks because I just walked right through a spider web. Right across my nose and my ears. Ugh. tickling the crap out of me. But anyway, there's a storm coming to the north of me, and I'm right on the very top, like I said. When you're hiking fast like this on a rough trail like this, you want to, especially since I'm alone, I like to keep my head up just so I don't walk into a predator somewhere. The problem is then you trip over these rocks because you don't put your foot up enough. Humans belong in the woods. We are the apex managers of the ecosystem. Despite the preservation mindset and teaching to the contrary, we belong here. If you're tired of watching your heritage, your sovereignty, and your forests go up in smoke, then you need to join the High Lonesome Society. We're a community of hunters, ranchers, and rural advocates fighting back against the preservationist takeover of the West and rural areas around the world. Click on the link in the description right now and become a part of the answer. I'm Trinity Vandenacre. Until next time, God bless. Here's another rub. Something rubbed that tree.